All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about the concepts of consumer and producer surplus, and I'm going to show you how to use definite integrals to actually calculate those things. All right, so first thing is, let's talk about what consumer surplus actually is. All right, so consumer surplus shows up when you are willing to pay more for something than you're actually being charged. So we'll use a really easy example. You have a favorite pizza place and you're like, that pizza is so good, I would be willing to pay $12 for that pizza. But the pizza place is only charging $8 for it. Now, it's not like they put it on sale or anything, so or like you have a coupon. So you're not actually like, oh, I was paying 12 bucks last week, now I'm only paying 8, so I'm saving $4. This is more of a concept. This is like, hey, I would have paid more for that. I feel like I'm getting a deal. Okay, so it's sort of an idea. You're not technically saving the money because you actually never really spent that much ever, but it's sort of a concept like, hey, I feel like I'm getting a good deal on this. So consumer surplus is the total amount that all consumers feel like they're saving. So it's the difference between the price they were willing to pay and the price that they were actually asked to pay, which is called the market price. Okay, so in a capitalistic society, the market determines the price of most goods and services, right? Like we talked about the idea that there is a price minimum on things like cigarettes to discourage people from buying them. If they were super cheap, perhaps more people would buy them. There's also a price floor on things like milk so that farmers get a little bit of a better amount of money on that type of good. Okay, but in most things, the government is supposed to stay out of pricing, and supply and demand work together in this free market system in order to figure out what the market price should be. Okay, so if people aren't buying enough, producers typically lower the price, and then that causes people to decide they want to buy more. When the price is too high, people typically demand less, and then the price should go down. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and draw a demand curve. So demand curves need to have a negative slope because when you look at price and you look at quantity, all right, so there was a knock at the door, so I honestly have no idea where I was. And let me also try to get this thing out of the way. Okay, so let me go back. We're going to draw a demand curve, and that's going to be price on the y-axis, and then quantity on the x-axis, okay? And since when you think about quantity demanded, what I was saying earlier is price and quantity demanded have an inverse relationship because as price goes up, quantity demanded is going to go down. And as price goes down, quantity demanded is going to increase. Okay, that's just a very simplistic view of supply and demand. So when I draw a demand curve, the demand curve has to come down. Okay, and so we typically don't go intersecting with the x-axis. I mean, you just kind of draw it like this. When you take an entry level or like an intro level economics, they usually just draw a line. But it sort of all depends, but this is fine. It's a curve. I think on most of the problems that we do, I think your demand function usually is a line. But for right now, it's just kind of an estimate. We're just drawing this curve. Okay, so what's going to happen is the market is going to set a price, okay? And I'm just going to randomly put it on here. And we're going to say, okay, here's the market price, okay? So this is called the market price. And what that means is it's the price that the market has set, okay? So, and then at the market price, there will be a market quantity. So at this price, this market price, this is the number of items that consumers will demand. So at this price, this is the number of items that the consumers will demand. So price demand, right? So price, quantity demanded, okay? So once we have that information, we can look at this demand curve that I drew. And if you look at this demand curve, all along this demand curve is the set of ordered pairs. And I'm really kind of focusing on this part right here because it's below this equilibrium. What I'm trying to show you is all along here, the consumers were willing to pay these higher prices. So, you know, I was willing to pay this price, but guess what? I only got charged that. I was willing to pay this price too, but I only got charged that amount. I was willing to pay this price, and I only got charged that. So this whole time, I'm willing to pay all these higher prices, but I'm only being charged this amount of money. So say, for example, you know, this is $15 and the market price was only 10. Hey, I feel like I just saved $5. So if you add up all these savings underneath this curve, but above the market price, so every time I was willing to pay all of these prices, but I only had to pay this price down here, this is called consumer surplus. So this is called consumer surplus. It's the difference between what I was willing to pay and what I actually had to pay. So consumer surplus is the difference between what I was willing to pay versus what I had to pay. And what I had to pay for me to have a surplus, this would have to be less, right? So what I had to pay was down here, and what I was willing to pay was up here. So this area under the demand curve is called consumer surplus. Now, if we give some of these things some letters so that we can actually work with them, so they typically call market quantity, they call it A, and they call market price B. And if I want to find this area under the curve called consumer surplus, again, I just said area under a curve, so it's obviously a definite integral. So consumer surplus is going to be equal to the integral from 0 to A of the upper curve, which is the demand curve. That's the upper curve, which is the demand curve, so D of X, minus the lower curve, so the bottom of this is the market price, so that's B, and you're going to differentiate with respect to X. So consumer surplus is the integral from 0 to A, because that's my X-axis, so whatever A ends up being, of my demand curve, because that's my upper curve, minus B, this Y equals whatever the market price is that horizontal line, so upper minus lower. Okay, so this is my upper minus lower. Okay, so let's do an actual example. So it says if the demand for electricity is D of X equals 1,100 minus 10x dollars, where X is in millions of kilowatt hours, find the consumer surplus at the demand level X equals 80. Okay, so I'm just going to sketch this real fast to get an idea of what's going on. You're going to be asked to sketch it on a test. So, but you're going to be asked to do consumer and producer surplus at once. So this is a line. It starts up here at 1,100, and it has a slope of -10. So it doesn't matter how you draw it. It's really no big deal as long as you know it's downward sloping. So this is D of X equals 1,100 minus 10x. Okay? Now, I know that my, let's see, the demand level is 80. So what I do is I go on the x-axis, because it literally says x equals 80, and I find 80, and I go up to my curve. And by the way, like, not drawn to scale. I really don't know where 80 is. I'll put it out here. Yeah, so it really doesn't matter. So let's see. Actually, this would be, I'm just trying to do this real fast. Okay, so I'm just going to throw it on here. Okay, and we're going to throw 80 right there. It really doesn't matter. I'm trying to figure out what the price is at that level, because I know this is 80. okay? And again, not drawn to scale, don't worry about that. I didn't take the time to figure it out because I'm in the middle of this video and I need to finish it quickly. So I need to figure out what this market price is, okay? So what I do is I just put 80 into my demand function. So I'm going to do D of 80 equals 1100 minus 10 times 80. And that's 1100 minus 800 equals 300. And this is in dollars. So what that means, if I go over here, this is $300. And if you go back and you compare that to what I was drawing up here, and what I'm going to do is I'll kind of reference it, but we have everything to now write consumer surplus, because consumer surplus is equal to this area right here. So under the demand curve, so if we go back up and look, under the demand curve but above the market price, I was willing to pay all of these prices, right? But that entire time I was only asked to pay $300. So I feel like I saved a bunch of money. So that's the integral from 0 to 80 of the upper curve, which is my demand function, minus my lower curve. Well, my lower curve is this horizontal line at y equals 300. So 300 dx. So if I clean this up, I get the integral from 0 to 80 of, let's see, this is negative 10x plus 800 dx. And I'm going to go ahead and integrate. So this would be negative 10x squared over 2 plus 800x. There's no plus c because this is a definite integral. And I'm going to come over here and simplify this. So this is negative, let's see, 5x squared plus 800x. And I'm going to evaluate it from 0 to 80. So if we do negative 5 times 80 squared, right, plus 800 times 80, and then minus, and then we would plug in 0, which is going to give us 0, but you can, I just want to write it out so you have some idea of what I'm doing here. So I just did upper minus lower. If you go ahead and do the math here, you end up with a consumer surplus of $32,000. So at a price of $300, consumers feel like they are saving $32,000 total. Okay? So that's called consumer surplus, because they got to pay a price that was much lower than they were willing to pay. Okay? All right. So now we're going to talk about producer surplus. Now, producer surplus is basically the same thing. It's just for producers. So producers are like, hey, this is how much I want to get for this item, but people are willing to pay more, so I'm going to take it, right? So let's say that, hey, I was willing to sell this pizza for $5, but the market says my pizza's worth $8. So people are giving me $8. I was willing to take $5, but people are giving me $8. So for every pizza I sell, I feel like I have a surplus of $3. I feel like I've made more money, okay? So that's producer surplus. Now, the way producer surplus looks is, first of all, we have to draw a supply curve. If you're not giving me any money, I'm not making anything. So the supply curve usually goes through 0, 0. I've never really seen it not, but I don't want to say that's impossible, especially with upper level economics. They might have some other models going on, but for everyone that I've seen, it's gone through 0, 0. So here's your supply curve. It's upward sloping because with supply, when your price goes up, quantity supplied also increases, and when the price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. So we would have a positive slope with supply, okay? Q sub S means quantity supplied. Now here we go again. There's going to be some market price, okay? So I'm just throwing an arbitrary price on here. And so this is going to be my market price. And at that market price, there's going to be a market quantity that I'm going to supply. So this is price and this is quantity. Now here's the deal. This whole time, I was willing to take this much money for my goods. But the market was like, you know what? No, I'm going to pay you this higher price. And I'm like, okay, sweet. So this area in here is called producer surplus because I was willing to take a lot less. I was willing to take all these lower prices that are on my supply curve, Okay. But the market was like, no, the price is this and we're going to pay you this. And I'm like, heck yeah, let's do it. This is producer surplus. I thought white would be a good choice, but it clearly was not. So this is producer surplus. Now, if we go with A down here, like we called it in the last example, and we call this B, when you do producer surplus, the integral is a little bit different. So you're still going to integrate from 0 to A along your x-axis. But now the upper curve is actually the horizontal line. So the upper curve is going to be your market price, like Y equals a number. And your lower curve is going to be your supply curve. So it's going to be B minus S of X. And so that is kind of the generic formula for producer surplus. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a problem. So it says for the supply function S of X equals 0.09 X squared dollars. The demand is 200, find the producer surplus. So I'm going to sketch this out. And this is a parabola. If you plug in 0, you get 0. So I'm going to go 0, and it has a positive A value, so it's going to be sloped up, which we need it to be. And so this is S of X. And then there is a, let's see, demand level is X equals 200. So I'm going to randomly throw X equals 200 on here. And again, I have no idea where it is. When I plug in 200, I've got to get some kind of output for the market price. Remember, price and quantity. So what I do is I plug 200 into the supply function. So I do 0.09 times 200 squared. And this is going to give me my market price at a supply of 200. So that's my supply level. So if I square this and I multiply it by 0.09, I get a price of $3,600. Not sure what we're buying here, but that's going to be my price. So the market says that my item is worth $3,600. But this entire time, I was willing to take way less for it, right? I was willing to take all of these lower amounts. So like if you go over, I was willing to take that. Right here, I was willing to take that. I was willing to take that. So there's all these lower amounts that I was willing to take, but the market was like, no, you get $3,600. That's what your good is worth, right? Know your worth, add the tax, okay? Bumper sticker. All right. I didn't come up with that. I'm pretty sure you've heard that before and you are making fun of me right now, but that's all right. Okay, so this area in between what I was getting, $3,600, and what I was willing to take, that's going to be consumer surplus, okay? So my consumer surplus is equal to the integral 0 to 200, because that's where the area, my boundary stops, right? So 0 to 200 of the upper curve, so Y equals 3,600, minus the lower curve, which is my supply curve. So my supply curve is 0.09 X squared dx. Nothing to clean up here, so I can go ahead and take the integral. So this would be 3,600 X minus 0.09 X cubed over 3. No plus C, because this is a definite integral, and we're integrating from 0 to 200. So let's see, that would be 3,600 times 200 minus, this simplifies to 0.03 times 200 cubed. So that's upper, minus lower. That's going to zero out, but I'll write it out. Oops, I'll use the 3. And if you do the math on this, you end up getting $480,000. So I called it consumer surplus. I'm sorry. I am not starting this video over. I have had to start it over a couple of times because it was corrupt. That's my bad. That's a big deal. Let's make sure that you understand that that's producer surplus. Producer surplus. I'll go back and try to edit it and make sure that I say, hey, I messed that word up. The producers feel like they have a surplus of $480,000 because they were willing to take way less money than the market price the whole time. Okay, so now what we're going to do is put it together. So make sure you watch the video on example number 3 Oh, you know what? No, I have to continue that part. So actually, let me do it right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put these together. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a demand curve. And so that's going to come down, demand down, D. Supply curve, we're going to go up. So like sup with an S. I don't know. That was terrible. You guys think I'm a nerd. But anyway, we're going to start at 0, right? And we're going to go sup. So supply curve goes up. Sup. Okay. So this is my supply curve. It's probably dorkier than I'm laughing at myself. Okay. Now, where these intersect, this guy right here, where supply equals demand, that's called equilibrium. And that's where suppliers willing to supply and demand of a product are equal. So the supply and the demand are equal. Buyers willing to buy and sellers willing to sell are at the exact same place. Okay? It's a perfect equilibrium. The market is running as perfectly as it can. Okay? So when supply is equal to demand, we are at what's called equilibrium. So if this is quantity and this is price, we call this the equilibrium quantity. And you will also hear that called the market quantity. And this price right here is called the, can I get rid of this? Yeah. I'm going to do EQ for equilibrium. This is called the equilibrium price. And you'll also hear it called the market price. So if you're asked to find this point, you just have to simply say this happens when supply is equal to demand. Okay? And then in this picture, the area under the demand curve above the equilibrium price, that's our consumer surplus. And the area, let's see, pick a different color. The area under the price but above the supply curve, this is called producer surplus. It's in alphabetical order, okay? So consuming C over P, clouds over plants, I don't know. But the consumers, they're closer to the demand curve because they're demanding or consuming. Producers are closer to the supply curve because they're producing or supplying. So this area, I'm trying to like make this bigger and stuff, and you're just like, please make this whole video stop, but I'm trying to make it cute for you. So this is consumer surplus, that area, and then this is producer surplus. Okay, so you have to be able to draw the graphs. You have to be able to find the equilibrium price / quantity. And you also have to be able to find consumer surplus and producer surplus.